So I'm Ross Brunson, Director of Member Services for LPI, and what I wanted to do today is to talk to you a little bit about, talk to you a little bit about Linux and open source and the career opportunities that we're seeing. So one of the things that Chuck and I do, and Chuck's the guy that just walked out over there. Chuck is the North American Sales Director, and I'm the membership guy and the CTO and a few other things. We're a small organization, but we have a pretty good-sized reach. One of the things that we do is workforce development, and that's workforce development for Linux and open source. So how many of you have, are you all educators? Okay, a few administrators in here. How many of you have students that are advocates, fans, whatever you want to call it, of Linux and open source? Typical response. You get 100 people in the room, one of these big shows, you get most of the hands to go up. You know, and the reason why, can anybody tell me why? What's the big deal with Linux and open source?
It's free.
Right. Now somebody would argue with you on that. That it's not really free, but you know, there's back and forth.
My students are interested because all the companies they're interviewing with have it on the tick list of things they should know. So they come to class because they're trying to search off the list.
Yep, that's right. Well, and that's a sort of a reverse altruistic way of learning something or thinking that it's important. For me, I like to like something, and then you know it's the whole thing about how do you get paid for what you like to do. Well, okay, it's not easy, but if you're a programmer, if you're a system administrator, you're somebody who likes to fool around with systems. You know, you've been spending a little bit of time doing that, and then your school starts to offer a program about Linux and maybe just Linux fundamentals. You know, something simple, something that gets you on the track. A lot of people will find that once they get involved in it, they really like it. And once they really like it, they realize what the career opportunities are. They're like, hey, this is great. Because this is a career path that you can span, even if you didn't do any maintenance on it, and you should, you could probably go 10, 15, 20 years down this career path and still be, you know, well employed. Okay, I'm going to show you some stats and some other things that are going to help you out. But first of all, what I want to do is tell you what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what we call the coming wave. We all in our industry, everybody, unless they're, I don't know, just can't see it or they don't want to, knows that there's this big wave of need for system administrators, qualified programmers, and anybody, you know, the open source workforce is what I call it. Okay, not just workforce, not just the IT workforce, but that special particular contingent that has anything to do with, you know, works with, improves on Linux and open source. Okay. One of the things that we'll talk about a little bit is that, you know, what that workforce looks like, and then my favorite part of all this, and usually everybody else's, is the career toolkit. I'll show you exactly how, with, you know, starting out from nothing, that you can go and, you know, custom fit what you're doing to get yourself a job and then a career in Linux and open source. It's not particularly hard. However, if you're somebody who thinks that, we've all heard of the, you know, the whole thing about, well, get your first IT job, you know, 60,000 right away kind of thing. You know, all these hypes and sales, and you know, people who think that, you know, if you just simply go to classes and show up in the workforce, they're going to give you a big check and you're going to have a great office and, you know, free fruit juice and all that stuff. Well, you might get lucky and that might happen. However, it's a lot of work. Getting a job is a job. You know, getting a career is, you know, quite a tough job sometimes. Okay, so we'll talk about exactly how to do that. We'll talk to you about why we think LPI is a good choice for doing that. Just know what open source is. I try to define it for folks. The thing about open source software is that typically you'll see the primary thing that denotes open source software is the license. The GPL, and there's about 15 different licenses. You can go to opensource.org and see all the different licenses and how they work. But the GPL, the GNU Public License, is the primary one. Versions of the GPL exist. There's version 1, 2, and 3, etc. But the key thing is that when you're using the GPL, whatever you do, you have to release with a source code. Now, how many of you are familiar with BSD? You know what BSD is? Okay. Tell me the main difference between BSD and Linux. I can sum up the two licenses. With Linux, you have to contribute. You are forced to contribute back to the greater community when you release software that's based on Linux, or you're going to get in trouble, right? Legal trouble, bad legal trouble. With BSD, you have to say, we used your software. That's pretty much it. You are not compelled to give back to the community. And so what we see is the Linux version of the licenses is effectively enforced contribution to the environment. So when we look at what's happening with Linux and open source, realize that there's this big bucket of code out there that everybody is using, the Linux operating system, which is basically the kernel and all the modules and tools and everything else around it. Everybody who's contributing to this is putting everything back into this big bucket, and it rises everybody else up higher. So as you improve the USB file system, and somebody else improves the X Windows system, and somebody else deals with keyboard drivers and file systems and backup and booting from the SAN and things like that, that's going to be contributing to everybody's ability to rise up higher to the next level of capabilities. So this is not something that is not inconsiderable, small in its effect on the community. Okay, and people who like to contribute their material back and be a part of something big, a community like that, really like doing it. Now the other people who look at it, we've all known somebody who says, well, basically my knowledge is my advantage. Well, that doesn't match exactly. Your knowledge is your advantage. It's actually your brain, it's your work ethic, it's all the things that make up you, that's your advantage. But you can work on Linux and open source software, contribute back to the community, and still have your advantage. Okay? It's not the denial of knowledge, it's the appropriate sharing of knowledge in this environment. Now, also a couple things that we have, the particular licenses, protection of the certain rights of the individuals. So in other words, we will actually have individuals who, Linus Torvalds is a perfect example, has released a large number of software packages into the environment. Those are protected. They're owned by Linus. However, the license says that anybody can use them under the restrictions and the rules that are there. So it's not like they're being given away and Linus has no control over it. It's that they are being released back into the environment, and Linus is the author of those and has certain rights with that. Okay, and then also the key one here for the GPL and some of the other open source licenses is that there are no restrictions on how you use them. Now, people look at this and go, no restrictions? None whatsoever? Well, you can't break the rules about how the software is redistributed and things like that. You can't do like Linksys did years ago and put out a router that had enhancements to the software and not put the source code of those enhancements out so that people could get to it. Okay, they got a little trouble for that. Well, that's okay. They learned. The other thing with this is no restrictions on who can use and how they can use it. Is let's use some wide-ranging and controversial examples. Okay, you can run a church, you can run an abortion clinic, you can run a gun shop, you can run a foreign government, you can run a criminal organization. It doesn't matter which of those you're using. As long as you don't break the rules of the open source license, nobody can come back to you and say, hey, put that down, you can't use Linux. Okay? Now why would this, just for a second, imagine that you're somebody in a foreign government outside of the United States and you're trying to decide what you're going to run your government on. Why would you choose Linux or open source as opposed to something that was proprietary and developed solely inside the United States? I can come up with one word. FCC. Most people outside the United States have this certain, kind of lingering feeling that somehow the FCC or somebody else in the United States has made a deal with Microsoft or Oracle or whoever it is, and because they can't see the code, they can't guarantee that there's nothing there. Because they can see every single line of Linux, they can sit down with their programmers and their security teams and certify, like Spain did, their own version of Linux. Every computer that runs in Spain on the government side is encouraged to run this version of the operating system. Why? Because it's secure, it's free, and it's very supportable for them. Okay? So these are important things when you think about, okay, I'm not just running my organization. What if I'm running an entire government? And I do not trust, in the good nature of other folks. Okay? And we can name 4 or 5 governments right now that would feel like that. Okay? Remember that open source software is typically created by a community. And a lot of people go, yeah, community, whatever. It's just a bunch of geeks sitting in the basement typing away and doing their stuff. No. There was a study, and I don't remember where it was, that showed that over 75% of the top 10,000 programmers were employed by organizations in a full-time basis, and they got good salaries as well. So if I was talking before this about a perfect example of this is Sarah Sharp, who works for Intel. She is the maintainer of the USB file system. Not a little bit of the USB file system, the USB file system for Linux. And she got her job because her professor recommended to Greg Crow-Hartman, who is one of the major kernel developers, that this would be a great intern to take on board and start teaching the system, etc. She's employed by Intel for a very good salary. And there are a lot of people who have found that scenario where they join a project, the project is going well, they're doing good code, and everybody can see that they're doing good code, and somebody says, gosh, I'd really like to have a programmer working on this particular thing. They can work on my stuff, and they can work on the greater good of Linux at the same time. And they hire that person. We're seeing a really great way to get a job in Linux and open source is to volunteer for a project and do a good job. Okay? All right. So the other thing is that when you look at my statement here, which is this is the most exciting area of development, it really is because there's so much happening on a consistent basis. It's amazing the amount of code commits that are being done on a daily basis. If you want to go and look and see, I don't know if we have any markers here, but I'll. Okay. Go to ohloh.net. This is run by the folks at Black Duck Software. It is the site that will tell you exactly who wrote what, how much they wrote, how good the code is, how well it's rated, and a bunch of other really good pieces of information. You want to know who are the right people to employ for a particular project, and you want to go look at that section of Linux that you're going to be affecting. You'll go and look and see who are the top code committers, who's got the highest quality, and you just simply contact those people and look and see where they're at. Hey, you got a job these days? No, I'm just in grad school. I'm going to be getting out pretty soon. Yeah, sure, I'd like to come and interview. Well, half of the interview process has been done already. Why? Because that person has a sterling reputation in the open source community. Open source is like the Old West. It's not what you say, it's what you do. It's not who you say you are, it's how good your code is. Demonstrably, to the public, how good your code is. Okay? ohloh.net. Yep. Now, a lot of people don't realize how much of what we call the internet is actually based on open source. I did some research and came up with this. And if you look at the bottom here, start down at the bottom of the operating systems that are publicly available by a ping or some sort of in-map call, etc., on the public internet, you'll see that 60% of those are Linux and Unix. The rest are, I can't remember what the set for Microsoft is. Microsoft kind of switched a few things over. They did a big deal with a couple of the very large domain parking. You know, you just get the domain and you just put it on the system. They did a deal where they gave the software away and support and services for free for X number of years to convert a couple of those really big parking sites over to Windows. So it shifted overnight the entire match of what's out there. Publicly addressable systems that are currently in use in a productive capacity, it would be a higher distribution. Okay. Now let's move up here for DNS, the domain name system, which is how you resolve every single real name that you type into your browser or try to access, from your clients on your system. 60%. So 60%, MySQL and Postgres, and the other databases, NoSQL, things like that. Those are all at about 60%. Apache and Nginx, 70-some-odd%, right? So you start looking at this and going, wow, a large amount of what I would call the internet, the whole thing, is based on Linux and open source. Now, how could it possibly be that Linux and open source is the basis of so many different hosts that are doing so much work? I mean, look, think of, on a daily basis, the billions of packets that are being moved around on this infrastructure, the sheer amount of data that's being moved around. And people go, well, I have, Linux is, it's kind of a kid's toy. It's not really, it's not really being used very much in the industry, in the enterprise. Okay. Hello, when people tell me that, Linux will grow up someday. I'm sorry, Linux has already grown up. Linux is in use on the majority of the internet and in enterprises, as you'll see in just a second. And these aren't things that just we're saying. These are the organizations that run these, and they're reporting back that their use of Linux and open source is rising rapidly. Okay, up at the very top here, PHP, Perl, Ruby, and Python, and then the CMSs, the content management systems, Joomla, WordPress, Drupal, things like that. Right up there at the very top, about 54% of browsers. This is actually a little higher. Chrome is starting to take a good amount of market share from everybody else, which is always interesting to see another player doing that. So how many of you use Firefox or Chrome? Right. I'm standing with TJ Maxx the other day. I've got my daughter with me. I'm doing a return, and the lady behind me is telling her friend Janice that she's like how to get rid of Internet Explorer and put Firefox onto her system. I'm standing there wearing a Firefox polo shirt. So, and I listened to this for a while, and like, this is how it happens. You know, it's like, you know, you're having a hard time, you get all these, you know, problems, can't do sites, that you should install Firefox. So I turned around and I looked at it, he's listening, he goes, oh. And I said, yeah, I wrote the whole thing. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't do it. But it was great because, you know, you hear this kind of thing happen all the time because people want to solve problems for their friends, right? I love it when open source is the problem solver. This is just a quick view of some of the companies that are using Linux in the enterprise in very significant ways. So one of my jobs in the past years, I worked for Novell Sousa, and I was in the data center area as a sales engineer. Some of my customers included Goldman Sachs, First Bank, some of these really large financial institutions, state of New York, and they were all making heavy use of Linux. Most of the pharmaceutical companies are making heavy use of Linux. Anybody who has to expand hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of machines on a consistent basis for trials, anything that requires them you know, to put a large number of processors towards something is going to be using Linux. Why? There's no licensing cost. There's a support cost, but there's no licensing cost. You cannot possibly afford to do this with Windows. You cannot possibly afford to do this with Solaris. It's too expensive on a per processor basis. Okay, that's where Linux is really expanding. You guys have heard of big data, right? You know what big data is? Can anybody define for me what big data is? Okay, I know it's when I first started looking at it, I was like, oh, this is hard to understand. You can go into Hadoop and all these other technologies. Big data is essentially when you sign into Gmail or whatever, Yahoo, Mail, and you start to see ads based on what you're typing or what's in your emails in the little frosting along the edges. That's big data. What's happening is they're looking in real time at what's going on with you, your account, and everything else around you, and they're using that data right away, instantaneously, and giving you something that's supposed to be a better experience. Never mind, it's kind of creepy sometimes to see that, you know. But it is the use of the data that you're generating to make a better experience for you. So gathering intelligence, and not just gathering the data, but taking the data and producing intelligent, usable, reusable, and customizable data for your environment, that's essentially big data. Okay? One of the things that it takes is a very large number of processors all doing the same thing. We've heard at Yahoo and some of the others 1,024 processor clusters that they're using. Okay, that's a lot of material. Now, some of the companies that are using Linux in a really big way, Salesforce. Okay, Salesforce has a Windows and a Linux side. They are moving rapidly towards more use of Linux. Why? Because they can spool up that many more machines. Just the way the market is moving is forcing them to have to use something that they can scale a lot better. Google, of course, one of the largest users of open source software on the planet, all those data centers, they don't run on Windows, they run on Linux. Okay? Specialized version of Linux. I didn't put Yahoo on here, but Yahoo is a big one. Amazon, you know, arguably what I would call the first cloud vendor. Amazon S3, Amazon EC2, all these different ways of just using things out there that it's a system, but you don't have to maintain it or run it or do anything other than interact with it. Okay? Really cool stuff happening overseas, however, is the Russian school system is transitioning almost 100% to the use of Linux. Why? It's cheaper. And the joke is that, and I heard this from one of the guys in the school system, he says, it's much cheaper for us to use Linux than to continue to pirate Windows. I'm like, okay, well that's one way to look at it. I like that. German universities. German universities, their engineering universities especially, are using Linux in a big way. Okay? Let's talk about the survey. This is an important piece because what they did is they went out and they surveyed almost 2,000 Linux administrators. Not just the guy or gal that runs a couple of servers here and there, but big enterprises, really big enterprises. Linux Foundation and Dice.com got together, and they found out that of the 1,893 enterprise sysadmins that they did a survey with, I love this. Increased at the expense of Unix and Windows. 84% of them are expanding their Linux and Unix usage. 8 out of 10 of them are adding more Linux servers, 2012, 2013, and continuing on. And then the last couple here, 75% of them have big data concerns. Why? They can't afford to do it on any other processor. It's not possible. I can't spool up, let's say that I'm a petrochemical organization, an oil company, and I am going out with my thumper trucks and doing these sonar reads. You ever seen those? They take a truck out and they have this gigantic foot, basically, and a big radar sonar panel on the bottom of the truck, and it does this boom, and it goes down and comes back up, and they can tell what's underneath as far as fuel, chemicals, etc. They can actually find oil in the ground underneath, but they got to process this data. So the truck goes out for a couple of weeks at a time and does all these readings, basically an inventory of the area, as it were, and then they come back and they process all this stuff with these gigantic clusters of open source software, Linux. Okay? There's no other way for them to do that. My favorite one, though, 2/3 consider Linux to be more secure than the other operating system options. There's always somebody who wants to argue with that. But we're talking about enterprise sysadmins and very large organizations. Okay? Just a quick note. How many times do you hear somebody who has not quite got it right, and they go, well, you know, they find a lot of bugs in Linux. They find a lot of bugs in Linux. Now, so that means that it's more buggy. No, they found them. If you take 2,000 lines of code and do an average of how many bugs occur in those lines of code, and you average it across Linux, Windows, proprietary, open source, whatever, think about it. The more bugs I find in those 2,000 lines of code, the better the software is, right? Think about that. If I don't find the bugs still stay there, they're still a problem. So you have to look at it from the perspective of if you have more people and more people look at it and more people find bugs, the software is actually better software. Okay? This is a feat of math that took me a while to figure out. It started off when Microsoft released the numbers for Vista bugs, and they said that they had fixed X number of bugs, and they compared it to all the Linux operating system bug track reports and said, see, that's much worse. And everybody said, no, you guys don't understand math. That's the problem here. Okay, note what this actually says. This is not that in 2010, 75% of organizations are using Linux, and in 2016, there's going to be 99%. It's mission-critical software. Software that runs the organization. If something goes wrong, we lose millions of dollars a minute or an hour. And that's mission-critical software. Linux is increasing dramatically, and that most people don't know this statistic. The mission-critical portfolios of 75% of the industry contain Linux already. Okay? This is a big number because at this point, Linux is in pretty much every data center that matters. Okay? And I would suggest that right now we're probably about the 85% mark. I love this one. Relative to other operating systems, in the next 5 years, do you think the use of Linux in your company organization will increase or other? This big yellow one is the increase. 1.4%, I love this one, will decrease the use of Linux in their organization. We just found out how many organizations in that industry will be going out of business in the next year or so. 1.4%. When you see numbers like that, and we see these all the time, when you see the number of open requisitions that are in place for our partners and our corporate members, when we see the amount of job traffic that comes through for people who are A, looking for a job, B, looking for somebody, want to hire somebody who can help them as a sysadmin, we know that this is going to get more and more and more critical. As a matter of fact, I just did something for Asia Pac not too long ago where we looked at the 5-year plan for China in the particular region. They're looking at a critical shortage in the next 4 years that will probably be so bad that they will actually begin to import people and to go offshore themselves. Malaysia is very happy about this. They're gearing up already because that's their typical first place where they'll do offshoring, or Indonesia or whatever. But you're starting to see that the sysadmin is in high demand. High demand equals what? good pay. Good pay, good benefits. We're starting already to see benefits are increasing for qualified sysadmins. Another one here is, what are your company's plans to support big data? Well, we're going to add Linux. Why are we going to add Linux? Because we can't afford to do it any other way. And also, when we talk about using Linux, I don't have to keep track of the licenses. Even if the licenses were very inexpensive on the proprietary side, just trying to keep track of those licenses requires a full-time team in a large environment. Anybody ever been involved in a licensing organization? So I've actually been one of the workers in a licensing, three-man licensing team for a large organization. We did nothing but keep track of the Windows NT 4.0 licenses for that organization. Pillsbury. Okay? It was a lot of work. It really was. And we were continually messing things up. They'd come to audit us and find us that, that we were 2% out of out of alignment or whatever, and we'd get fined. Okay? People just decided at a certain point, Linux is not quite as easy. Sometimes it's not quite as easy for me to configure or use or whatever. But once I reach the point of pain that says, I don't want to do this other thing anymore, then I'll switch over. And a lot of organizations have done that. So let's talk about the open source workforce. This is a phrase that I use to describe not just the people who are in IT, but who are in IT and mostly, let's say 50% or more of their job has to do with the use of Linux and open source. Now, I happen to be one of the open source workforce. I have been for a number of years, mostly because I'm a trainer and a presenter and an author and stuff like that. But as a sysadmin who works in a mixed Linux and Windows environment, you're part of the open source workforce. There's no question about that. Okay? This is an interesting stat. If you take a look at the U.S. unemployment figures, 8.3% for 2011, now take a look at the tech sector, down to 5.3%. We're looking at the tech sector unemployment numbers to be 3.8% in 2012. So that's what the numbers are going to come out to be. Next year, it's probably going to be even lower. So you're in college right now, your students are in college, and they're trying to figure out what they ought to do. What's one of the kindest things that you can do to them? Introduce them to Linux and open source. Do they have to go down that entire career path? Absolutely not. But just giving them some knowledge about it so that they can kind of do a taste test and see if they like this. This is a great way for you to turn somebody into one of the people who's going to be employed in that particular sector. Okay? So Linux Foundation and DICE did a job survey. They said that 81% of the recruiters say that hiring Linux talent is a priority. I absolutely concur with this number. All the recruiters are now all up in arms trying to find good open source talent. Why are they trying to find good open source talent? Because the companies that pay their bills and their fees are telling them this is what we want. Okay? This is not a group of people that do things on a whim. It's like realtors. Okay? Realtors do what they do because there's going to be a fee involved and they like to help folks. Okay? These folks who are getting people's jobs and are getting open requisitions and trying to fill those, there's a definite reason why that's happening. Okay, the other thing here, 63% of the employers seek more Linux talent related to other areas. Okay, so you see the numbers from before, from the DICE and Linux Foundation survey, and now you see these and they correlate. You're seeing more people using Linux, you're seeing more demand for Linux professionals. It's simple. It's going to happen that way. Okay? A lot of people forget one thing, and that is that if you take two organizations of the same number of seats or servers or whatever, one is running on proprietary software, the other is running on Linux and open source, there will be almost a 2 times number of admins on the proprietary side than there is on the Linux and open source side because of all the additional things that have to be done. Okay, this is we've seen this data. I've seen it in my own organizations, and so what will happen is people will go, "Oh well, you're reducing the number of sysadmins." How many of you have heard somebody say, "Our company is going to the cloud. We're not going to need any more sysadmins"? Really? You don't need anybody technical there to help users and folks understand how the software works? What do you think the cloud runs on? Pixie dust? It runs on the back of sysadmins. The sysadmin may not be in your organization right now if you're all based on Google Apps for business or education or whatever, but they may be out there in the cloud running those systems, and they're going to be out there. So it's kind of like shifting sysadmins around. Okay, it's not we need less sysadmins, it's that we need them in different places for different tasks. Okay? Hiring managers say that Linux talent is hard to find. Well, I can certainly agree with this. It's one of those things that I've noticed a lot when you go to shows and you talk to people and you demonstrate a level of technical competence. You get job offers. You get offers to come and interview. You get asked to help people pick good Linux talent. Now, I'll do that third one because I already have a job and I like my job. I don't want to start moving around and doing all kinds of stuff. I say that with Chuck in the room, but no. Unless that really good one comes along. No, I really like what I do, but the thing is that a lot of people are having a tough time interviewing and finding good Linux talent. Why? Because the pickings are so slim. Everybody already has a job right now, or they're in school at the moment. Okay? So if you want to get in touch with these people, Linux Professional Institute is a good way to do that. We have over 250,000 candidates in our pool right now. We have large numbers of open requisitions that are out there. We have vendors who are joining us as corporate members because they want to have access to our folks. And we definitely want our folks, our candidates, to go out and get jobs in the industry and recommend the Linux Professional Institute. So that's how it works, right? Okay, so the other piece here is nearly a third of companies are offering above normal pay for Linux professionals. Okay, we had this situation a few years ago with the whole MCSE market and things like that, and it's a great thing. It's a great thing if you're a sysadmin. It's not so great a thing if you're a company, because now you're in competition. You're trying to get people to come and work for you and pay attention to you. And the problem is that if the market is really good, they can go anywhere. They can work for you for a year, and off they go to somewhere else for another pay raise, and off to another place for another pay raise. Okay? Well, that's the way it works. There'll be a downtime sooner or later, 10 years from now, when something else comes along, but that's okay. You've got to ride those particular waves, right? But the problem is that if you're in a 4-year program and the job market is great, my wife, an RN, can attest to this. If you're in a 4-year, that's a 6-year program, 4-year program, and the jobs are great in that market, when you go in that program and it shifts halfway through, now what? So how many of you have programs where your student's market isn't exactly the same as it was when they entered that program? Okay, I'm suggesting to you that Linux and open source and a knowledge, of how to participate in the open source workforce is going to be a good thing for them. All right, so last pieces here. What is it that's actually driving the demand that we're seeing so much of? Because there are some reasons behind this. We talked a little bit about it. They need talent, obviously. Okay, that produces demand. There's a lot of Linux use. There's a great deal more of in-house support. People are supporting their own systems these days as opposed to paying somebody like Global Services in order to do that. Okay, so there's a lot more use in-house for the organizations. People who want to contribute back to the Linux community. Believe it or not, there are a lot of organizations out there who look at the scenario of we got over $3 billion worth of software development for free. That's how much Linux is approximately worth. $3 billion worth of software development. If you could start now, it would take you 10 years and that much more to get something that was similar. And everybody gets to use it as long as they follow the rules. So they say we want to give back to the community. What is giving back to the community also good for? PR. Okay? You want your organization to be seen as a participant in the Linux and open source community, then you hire people and you say, you know what, Bill, Ted, Jane, I'm going to encourage you, maybe I'll even require you to spend 10% of your weekly time working for us, working on an open source project. You need to contribute to a project. Pick the one you want, go ahead. Okay? Google's real good about this. There's a lot of organizations that do that. My own boss does that. I actually spend a little bit of time on a weekly basis working on an open source project. Why? It's good. It's a good thing that we are based on Linux and open source. We should be contributing back to the community. Okay? It's also people migrating and going over to Linux systems, and then the difficulty of retaining talent. There is a difficulty in retaining talent because if somebody else walks by with a big fistful of cash and says, hey, why don't you all come work for me? They might do it. This happens all the time in support organizations, and it happens a lot with developers too, especially really in-demand developers like kernel developers. Okay? They're really hard to retain. Companies, what are they looking for? What are the hottest jobs out there? The 2 hottest jobs are Linux developers and system administrators. Pains me to see that developers are more, sorry for those of you developers, pains me to see that developers are more in demand than sysadmins are. But that's okay. We are the unsung heroes, we sysadmins. We can deal with that, right? However, if you look at IT managers, 20% of that, and outside consultants, 67%. There's a large number of people who think that it's a much better deal to employ an outside consultant, pay them a flat fee or whatever it is, and not have to pay all of the benefits and all the rest of the stuff to get that particular thing done. I spent 10 years of my life as a trainer and a consultant doing exactly that. You know, it's an easy thing to do. Fortune 500 companies, they step up the ante. They want app developers and they want kernel developers. Okay? Jim Zemlin over at the Linux Foundation said it really well. Linux jobs, some of the hottest jobs in all of tech. Hiring managers, they understand this and they're aggressively going after Linux professionals. Aggressively going after Linux professionals. Signing bonuses equal to half a year's salary or more are the norm in certain areas. Okay? You can't get that kind of money unless you're involved in, I don't know, something illegal elsewhere. Okay? It's a good gig right now. It's a great time to be involved in it, and we don't see anything slowing down for the next 10 to 15 years. And by that time, there'll be something else that's coming along. We don't know where that's going to go, but this is a great time for them to be involved. Okay? So now let's talk about how to get a job. This was a tough one. I spent a lot of time working on this because I knew how I got a job in Linux and open source. It was not the traditional way. I volunteered around LPI, was in the booths whenever I went to shows, wrote books, did boot camps based on LPI objectives, etc. Was a trainer for many years. My job, Jim, my boss, likes to call it the world's longest job interview. 10-year-long job interview. Okay? But LPI got to the point where they needed somebody in-house who did what I did, and it was a perfect fit and a good fit. Okay? I was very happy to do that. Most people only have 10 years to do that. They want to kind of jumpstart this. Now, I've told you all about all the people who can go out and just go, ta-da, here I am, give me a job, and somebody will tackle them and stuff money in their pocket and off they go. It does happen. It's not the typical scenario. Especially if you're young, you're just out of school, just about to get out of school, and you don't have a lot of experience in the industry. Then it can be tough. And I think we've all been there, right? Some point or the other, where somebody says, well, so tell me what you've done. And the answer is effectively, well, not a lot. But I learned fast. Yeah. Kiss of death for that conversation. So let's talk about what happens. The things that we know. Linux is being employed very aggressively. You're seeing this in the market. You're going to see this in the numbers as we go forward. Cloud, big data, all the security concerns, those are there as well. OSS talent, definitely in short supply. You need experience and you need skills in order to get a job. And last but not least, we think that certification is one of the key pieces that will get you that extra step. My own personal career was when I got out of the service, I went and took a few classes. I got my first certification, happened to be a Novell certification. I applied to a job in the city of Burnsville. The city of Burnsville, this job was widely advertised. I had no idea how many other people were applying for the job, 350. This is in a suburb of Minneapolis. So 350 people. I came home after the first interview, because they interviewed basically everybody. I came home after the first interview going, hey, this is great. My wife said, oh, look, it says in the paper here, over 350 people applied. Okay, thanks. Any other great news you want to tell me? Anything else to cheer me up, after this interview? And she goes, yeah, they're only going to hire one person. Why wouldn't it be you? Great, okay. We went through 4 rounds of interviews. 4 rounds of interviews. I'm like, I hope this turns out, because if it doesn't, I've wasted a lot of time. It came down to me and 2 other guys. We were all veterans, and I had a certification and the other 2 didn't. Our experience levels were the same. We all interviewed well. We had a big round table interview, but they kept asking everybody questions until somebody died or whatever. And I actually got the job. But I never forgot the fact that one of the things that got me into the pool was that I had a certification. One of the things that also got me in the pool is I was a veteran. But it was that certification that popped me up into the 15% or so of people who are going to get that next round of interviews, and then the next set of interviews, and the next set of interviews. Because when they sort you, all the applicants who come in, they sort you based on a set of points that they've assigned this algorithm to each one of the things that meet the qualification. You look at that big list of qualifications, they'll tell you what they are. They've got a point value associated with those, okay? And they're going to sort you in this big spreadsheet, and the ones that go to the 15% of the top, they're going to schedule interviews with, typically. Well, I've heard people go, I don't think certification has value. I don't want to spend my time. You know, it's paper tiger, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, tell you what. You stand outside the candy store, press your nose against the glass, and look at all the goodies in there while other people who have gotten a certification and have a better point score are getting the interviews. Now, is it a good idea to get a certification or not? If I can't get into the interview, I can't show them what a sterling worker I'm going to be. And so if I can't get into the interview because I decided I didn't want to get a certification, then I shouldn't complain about it, right? So it's just one of those things that you need to do. That and the fact that a certification is an independent third-party metric. When your hiring manager is looking at the people that they're trying to hire for a particular position, they may or may not be able to physically vet you. Personally, they may not be able to do that. 10 years ago, I could. Now, instead of 3 disciplines on a project, I may have 15 or 20. I can't possibly vet all those people. And it takes time and money and energy and everything else to vet them. If that person has already accomplished an independent third-party metric that says they are at least this good, they've done most of the work for me. I'm automatically going to go with somebody who has a certification just to see if they know the rest of their stuff. Okay? You can have all the experience in the world, but if you don't have a certification, you may not get the interview. And that's a tough lesson to learn, and it really hurts when you don't get an interview and you know you'd be good for that position. Okay? All right, so what do you need? You need some education, right? College, tech school, whatever it is. Some experience, right? How do you get the experience? How do you get the first job? They say you need experience. Well, if you gave me the job, I would have experience, and then I can go get another one. Oh, wait, that's not the right way. I shouldn't tell you that. You need to have provable passion. You need to be somebody who's active in that arena. You want to be an all-world big deal in Linux and open source? Act like one. Get out there and do something that shows people that you have a passion for that particular field. It's like saying, I want to be a tennis star, but I don't take tennis lessons. I don't have any of the equipment, and I don't do any of the things that would cause me to be a tennis star. You've got to start acting like it before you can actually start to prove it. And you need that independent proof, okay? Most people have the first one. Some have a little bit of experience. Some might have no experience, some education, and a certification. So we just got to find the one that you got a flat tire on, that you're low on, and go from there, okay? So I always ask for you, I can't tell you how many young people come up at the booth, at the show, Jack knows this too, and they'll come up and they'll say, well, you know, I just graduated and I'm trying to get a job. Okay? Well, tell me about what you do. I just graduated and I'm trying to get a job. Okay, dude, come here. Let's talk to you about this, okay? Do you have any of these? I ask them literally, do you have any of these things in your life? Is there a religious organization? Is there a civic organization? Do you have a special interest group or club that you belong to? You guys all get together and play Magic, The Gathering, or something like that, right? Is there any alumni organizations that you belong to? There probably are. How about a group of your peers? Okay? Every single one of those groups of people has an IT need of some kind or another, even if it's really small, just a website or something like that. It's typically a website, probably some email, you know, a little bit of project collaboration, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so what you're doing is you're trying to figure out, how can I provide those services? Okay? Do you have a college or university? Absolutely. Do they have a computer lab? Everybody wants to go work in the computer lab because the pay is so good, right? No, I mean, because you can get experience, right? Okay? Apply for a job with one of those. Join an open source project. This is a great way to do this. Dig in, start doing some of the dirty work, show that you're a good worker, show that you can be depended upon, and pretty soon you'll start showing up in the commit logs, you'll start showing up on the website. Put that on your resume. I'm a part of so-and-so open source project. If you're trying to get into Linux and open source, you've got to show that, right? This is my favorite one. If you show up, and I'm a hiring manager, and you say, I want to be an all-world big deal in Linux and open source, I'm going to Google you. I will instantaneously, the moment you talk to me, Google you. Why? Because I want to see what you do. If I see an I Love Linux blog, that's good. If I see all your, volunteering and OSS events, like the ones that Chuck and I go to all the time, our volunteers are all over the place. We make sure to give good press to our volunteers. And your how-tos and videos and all the rest of that stuff that are out there, if I see that kind of stuff, you're a good bet for me as a hiring manager. Or do I see this? Do you see all your college drinking pictures? Okay? Which one am I going to see? And I tell people, look, if you show me that you're trying hard to be a Linux and open source professional long before you're going to become one, I'll probably give you an interview. Why? At the very least, it'll be an informational interview. Okay? I'll try to help you out. I might put you on as an intern on somebody else's project. Why? Because you're trying. Not just sitting back and going, oh man, it's so hard to find a job. Yeah, well. Okay. So, what does it do for you? It tells the hiring manager that you have all these qualifications. I have passion and initiative. I learn. I do that stuff often. I can use my time and resources. I can work with others. I provide value for the pay that I receive. And I'm a good bet for an employee. But the key thing is you need to add a certification to your degree. And I'll leave you with this and just the very end of what we're talking about. And that is that if you were to look at the side wall of every hiring manager's life, actually or virtually, there is a set of open requisitions that are pinned up on that corkboard next to them, and they all say a job title, and they have a person associated or a number of people associated with it. How many of these do I need? If you walk in with a degree in MIS and say, I've got a degree in MIS, and they say, well, what do you, tell them help, they're struggling to map you to the open job requisitions that exist. If you walk in and say, well, I've got a degree from such and such and so-and-so, and I am a certified Linux system administrator, bam, there's 2 job recs right there that I can match you against. You did the work for them. You didn't make them struggle and try to, sift data and everything else, okay? That's a really important thing. So when folks come in and they've gotten their certification, I'm more likely to give them an interview. All right. Certifications, we talked about that. Last one here. I just discovered this one the other day. This was a big one. We had somebody walk up and go, my insurance company tells me that I can't get my consulting professionals insured unless they're certified. What can you help me out with? We did some investigation and we found out that if they are certified, they're licensable, they're insurable, and they also become a much better prospect when you try to bill somebody out for a higher rate. Okay, your hiring manager and your consulting manager is going to like you for that. Okay, this is a good thing. All right, really quickly, I'll finish up. I wanted to give you all that, but I also want to let you know that one of the things that we do is we support heavily the workforce development of Linux and open source professionals. We're an institute that's not just a testing organization, we're an institute. We look after our candidates, we work with them, we connect them to jobs. If you want to talk to Chuck or I afterwards about adding Linux and open source materials to your curriculum, we do this all the time. We talk to academic institutions, we show them exactly how they can take their current Linux or Unix fundamentals programs and put a really nice certificate of achievement at the end of that for a very, very small cost, which that certificate of achievement is going to help a great deal when the person goes into the workforce. So what I want to do is, just really quickly, if you go to lpi.org and get registered, then we can make sure that we get you any of the materials that you want. You come downstairs to the 4th floor. We're right outside the cafeteria, and talk to us. LPI is a big organization. We have over 320,000 exams that have been given. We have over 125,000 certified professionals, almost all of whom are currently employed at this time. And we do studies and surveys with them and see how they're doing. The other thing is that we also have 25 affiliates in 7 languages. We have a lot of people out there, and they're all pushing LPI. We talk about Linux Essentials, and what you can also do is take a look at the rest of the professional level program. Linux Essentials is easy to add to your curriculum. We'd love to help you do that. Typically, it'll take anywhere from 5 to 10% difference between your current program and what we have in order to be able to add that certificate to it. Okay? So I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to give you our email. Mine is rbrunson@lpi.org. Chuck is the guy who has all the business cards. I didn't bring but about 10 of them for some strange reason. And thank you.